Good morning and welcome to Body Talk. Today is Tuesday, the 20th of June, 2023, and you are listening to Body Talk on the No Static Radio Network. My name is Ayl Bridges. Body Talk is a program for your mind, body, and soul. Good morning, and I hope everyone enjoyed a great, fun, safe, and super fantastic weekend. First and foremost, let's continue to celebrate Black History every day throughout the year. Have some real quick announcements before I introduce our guest. I call him the man about town. In the studio today, we have some visitors, some excellent visitors. First, we have Virginie. She's a student at Max Hayes High School. She will be going into the 11th grade, um, and she's here just with an interest in broadcasting. And we have Anastasia. She's a recent high school graduate. She's on her way to John Carroll University on a full freaking ride, academic ride. And congratulations to both students. And we also have escorting them Mr. Anthony. He's the job coach at Youth Opportunity Unlimited, better known as YOU. So congratulations to the two students, Virginie and Anastasia. As you can see, again, I feature books from my library. The book to my right would be the title Future Black Rage. It's written by Dr. William Greer and Dr. Price Cobbs. They are both two black psychiatrists, and they wrote a book called Black Rage. And the blue book to my left is the U.S. Constitution. Let's get right to the show. Today we have, I call him Mr. T. McGee. It's Tawayne McGee. He is a human rights activist based here in Cleveland. So let the audience welcome Mr. McGee, and we're going to have a real in-depth discussion. Mr. McGee.
Yes, sir.
Share with the audience your early background in Cleveland. What area of the city were you raised in? What high school or college did you attend? And then we'll go from there.
I grew up, but definitely born and raised in Cleveland. I grew up in between the Collinwood and Glenville communities. For high school, I attended the Gid Academy. So Ted Ginn Sr. was one of my mentors coming up. I didn't play football, but I was really into the academics in my high school years and continuing. For college, I went to Tri-C for a short while, majored in audio production, but due to funds, I couldn't continue to go to school, so I had to postpone college and attend a trade school called Ohio Guidestone. With them, they help people from the ages of 18 to 24 get their GEDs and also engage in the workforce. I went there with a workforce program, and then within January 2016, I graduated from the program with a certificate of hospitality. But from then, 2016 was kind of like the beginning of my public service career.
Okay, and just for a minute, you're listening to the Body Talk Radio program on the No Static Radio Network. And if you could just pull the mic down just a little so you can be heard much clearer. And you're listening to the Body Talk Radio program on the No Static Radio Network. You mentioned Ted Ginn.
Yes.
And you said he's one of your mentors.
Yes.
What attracted you to Ted Ginn?
Well, first of all, his suits. I do love his wardrobe, but with the fact that he basically came up in the same arena that I did in the same area, the Glenville neighborhood. He started out. I remember listening to him speak multiple times, even seeing a couple of his bio films, off of social media, and he really had a hard life and to find success with his son Ted Ginn Jr. and his with his fellow students who was at Gid Academy before I was. And when I first met him, when I was 10th grader, at the end of my sophomore year, I went to Collinwood my 10th grade year in high school. And with Gid Academy being down the street, my grandmother and my mother was like, "You're going again," and I'm like, "Of course, me being a young man, I'm like, there's not no girls there. And they's like, that's the point.
I was going to ask you, when you were, is Gann Academy now co-ed, or is it still
it's still single
all-boys school?
All boys school. Yeah.
Okay, so if I may, your Gann Academy was the Black Benedictine.
Yeah.
In Cleveland. Okay. Let's talk about your focus here in human rights. You're a human rights activist, and for the listeners, first define what an activist is.
Well, my definition of an activist is somebody who is actually willing to, go out, and of course they don't have any particular boundaries versus if you were like a title holder, because I've been a title holder. I did one term as a precinct committee person, and that right there, I learned a lot within the serving of 1 year, 4 year term of being precinct committee. Is with a title for anybody who holds an elective seat, you have more connections with a title, but yet you are limited to certain things to do. But as an activist, you basically it's like you have no limits.
So let's back up for a minute. You said you served 4 years as a precinct committee member or men. What does a precinct committee person do? What's his or her responsibility?
Well, basically, it's more hands-on. So you're elected to represent a small part of your ward, maybe at least 100 people, or maybe even less than that. So what you do is that you make sure their voter registration is updated. Make sure they're informed on elections, when it's time to vote, which is basically it. There's an election every year. It's not just when it's statewide elections like governor, U.S. Senator, Congress, or even presidential. Every year is always an election, whether it's judge, mayor, or even, once again, the higher federal elections. But, and also let them know that when it's town halls for candidates, that this is where they're meeting here, and you could actually meet them directly to actually ask some questions.
So, in the general broad sense, a precinct committee person is supposed to outreach to the members in his or her precinct and introduce the candidates to them, or say, who do you want to support? Is that?
Yeah, basically bringing them up to speed on when it's election time, and also candidates who's running.
And you're listening to the Body Talk radio program on the No Static Radio Network. We have Mr. McGee with us, and he is a human rights activist. Now, you mentioned, let's stay on the precinct committee role for just a minute. For the listeners outside of Cleveland, it takes a whole lot of signatures to get on the ballot. It takes 5.
Yeah.
5 signatures, if I remember correctly, to make the ballot as a precinct committee. And then you said if I recall your bio correctly, you were a Central Committee member?
Yes, Central Committee member from 2018 to 2022.
Now, what does the Central Committee member do?
Well, the Central Committee is the same thing as Precinct Committee, is that they just use Central Committee as more of as an important term.
Okay.
But it's the same thing.
Okay. All right. So now let's roll into your human rights aspect. What issues, and I know I've looked at your social media, and you and I have met and been introduced in different venues around the city. What would you consider the top 3 to 5 issues, human rights issues in Cleveland that you focus on, or you would like to see change?
Well, I really just don't focus on Cleveland.
Okay.
I have traveled through the state, through multiple counties, and I remember running when I ran for public office. I had to take that energy with me when I decided to become a human rights activist, listening to the people, asking them what issues matter to you that you feel that the candidates who are running for the statewide seat, like U.S. Congress, Senate, and governor, that they are not addressing, that you feel that needs to be addressed. So representing them, being an advocate on the behalf of the voters, connecting to the candidate, saying that, listen, these are the issues that matter on behalf of the people. They would like to support you if you're going to support their issues and bring them out if you get elected into term.
See, and it's interesting, you use this real key word, starts with an L, listening. And again, I don't want to focus on one individual. One of the things that I'm hearing, especially for elected people, they don't listen. They have a tendency to get into office and become deaf. And they want to do what they want to do. And quite often they're doing the bidding for somebody else, might be a corporation or a business how do we get people to listen, but more so, let's keep it at this level for just a moment. How do we get voters to vote? There was an abysmal turnout in the last election. Less than, I think it was 18 to 20%, if I remember correctly. That's not good.
And when you say within the last election, you mean as in the mayoral
election, yes.
Mayoral conference,
Yeah. Because the mayor was up, all the congressional districts were up, et cetera, et cetera. How do we get people to vote?
I mean, basically let them know that you're one of them. Don't step up to people like a politician, because people don't like politicians. I know I don't. And I think that's one thing that I paid attention to when I ran for councilman, especially within the mayor's race. It came down between Mr. Kelly and currently Mayor Bibb now, and people like that. Kelly, as in, okay, you've been council president for how long, and what have you done? Versus current Mayor Bibb, fresh new face, young, comes from the corporate aspect, and can bring new ideas to the table. Basically out with the old, in with the new. And how I felt about it was that, okay, maybe you're right. What has Kelly done for the past, 10 years or more so that he's been in his council president position? I could look up all the legislation and all the stuff that I need and try to compare it to Bill's background as a corporate guy. He said that, he's been in the corporate aspect for a while. He started a nonprofit. And I think that, and he did manage big multiple $1 million budgets back when he was in the corporate aspect. So I think that's, even though that he has not held a political office, I think that's some sort of experience,
Well, you listen to the Body Talk Radio program on the No Static Radio Network, and we have with us in the studio Mr. Tawayne McGee, and he's a human rights activist. It's interesting, and I don't want to change your words, okay? When you talk about political, okay, first define that in your terms. What do you mean by political? A politician.
Yeah, okay, you're making promises that, like you say, okay, once I get in, I'm going to work on this and work on that. But you possibly, who've never held that position before, might be totally different from the position that you currently hold. It's the process. It's every political seat that you hold might have a different process. So with you going on the campaign trail saying I'm going to do this and do that, as soon as you get elected, you might not be able to do those promises that you said you was going to do.
Okay, so let's drill down to Cleveland, since we're both in Cleveland.
Okay.
There's agents here in Cleveland, from Cleveland, excuse me. Cleveland is a Democratic town.
Of course.
All of city council members are Democrats. The mayor is a Democrat. The last Republican mayor was George Voinovich.
Yes.
Right? And George Voinovich was a good guy. Did okay. Matter of fact, did a great job. When you talk about politics, that means it's a give and take. And we'll step up just a level here. When you talk about a city council member, his or her responsibility is to be a legislator and to have oversight of the executive, which is a fancy term for the mayor. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot because you might want to run again. A lot of people perceive that city council doesn't legislate. They really don't perform good oversight of the mayor. Because if you look back over the last 20 years, there really has not been a budget that was unapproved or disapproved by city council. That's strange. So also when you talk about oversight, you can't have a program and award money to it on January the 1st, just as an example, and then pull that function back in for a hearing on August the 1st and say, well, what have you done? And all the hiccups and mistakes or whatever. will come out, well, we didn't do this, we didn't do that, we didn't do that, you know, we can't find the money, some of them misappropriated, et cetera, et cetera. So at what juncture will the voters take notice and say, we need people who actually are going to do their job and not be politicians? And I'll let you answer in just a second. A politician is nothing but a title of a person who holds an office. Just like a person who's on a baseball team is a baseball player. Simple, all right? So what, again, I'm going to go back, and I'm not trying to press you for an answer. How do you get people to vote intellectually? And I don't mean that by a person has to have a fancy degree or graduate degree or terminal degree, meaning PhD or a law degree, versus voting emotionally. Emotional voting is what I see going on in Cleveland. Well, so-and-so lived next door to me. He or she dated my 19th cousin, or they went to high school with me. That's emotional voting. So, again, how do we get people to vote? And you're the activist here. I'm just the interviewer.
Well, listening to you as an interviewer, you presented some things that I did not know. So I thank you, Mr. Bridges, for informing me on some new stuff.
Well, thank you.
But how to get people engaged, really. Once again, you said there's emotion when it comes to voting. Now, I wouldn't want a person to just vote for me because they know me. You know, I think, thank you. But no, vote for me because you feel that I'll be the best candidate for the position. I'll be the best representative for you and the fellow residents within that district or area, ward, whatever you want to call it. You know, and it's just, okay, President Obama, 2008, right? I was a youngin' at the time. You know.
Oh, you're still young, trust me.
We'll see. And for me, all I grew up was that, you know, my mother, you know, she shedded tears because one of us, like this young, I guess I think Obama was in his early 40s when he was elected to president and everything too, like the first African American president, you know, ever in America, you know. And many people that I knew as I got older, they say, yeah, some people admitted they voted for him because, you know, he was black, you know, and I'm black and I'm vote for the guy. Or I'm like, well, that's a good reason, but don't just vote for him because he's black. You know, that's kind of an emotional thing right there.
It is.
But vote. Did you hear him speak? Did you see how he carries himself? Is he presidential?
I see, that's interesting. I'm going to insert some words. I'm not going to change what you said. See, character and integrity is a very important quality to have if you're running for office. See, if you have no character, you have no integrity. Okay? And so you mentioned Obama, and I had some of the associates or friends, whatever term is being in vogue today. If you look at Obama, and I changed it for just a minute, if you take his name, don't change it, you take his credentials or his resume, don't change it, and you put an R behind his name versus D for Democrat, would he have still won?
And during that time, you know, because compared to now versus back then, now this is 2008. Bush was out.
He term limited.
Right, he was term limited. Obama came in. Now, at that time, I think that people may have got semi-sick of the Republican Party at that time. But it wasn't how it is now.
Okay.
But I think that if Obama was an R at that time, probably not.
It's something to think about.
Yeah, it's something to think about. Yeah.
And see, and I don't want to. I'm going to borrow your words.
Okay.
I'm not going to steal because you're sitting here. You would catch me. I'm going to borrow your words. See, you said that, and we both said, more so the black community, let's say, voted for him because he was black. And I had mentioned what a couple of my friends said. He just happened to be a black man who became president. And I think that several African Americans or black Americans thought that, well, we got this black man in the White House now. So the fence is going to come down. He's going to cut a door is going to be cut on the south side of the White House. It's going to be a Dutch door. And it's going to be a neon sign over the door. Ribs and chicken dinners here. People forgot that he had to represent not only black Americans, Asian Americans, white Americans, and so forth and so on. And depending on how you want to gauge or judge history, some people say he didn't do anything for black Americans. Some people say he didn't do anything for this segment or whatever. But and I don't want to say I'm focused, I'm stuck on this. I'm focused on this because and not about Obama. One of the things that's important is the most basic thing that anybody can do from a civic engagement. If you're eligible to vote, go vote.
Mm.
And we're seeing that voting turnout is diminishing.
Yes, it's very low as of the moment. Probably depending on what type of election that you're looking at.
Well, and again, you're the activist. I'm just the interviewer.
Okay.
So, what's important here is, depending on who you talk to,
Mm-hmm.
all politics is local. Okay, I'm not saying not to go vote in presidential election or Senate, U.S. Senate, U.S. Congress elections. If you don't vote in your local elections, that impacts you more than any other election, especially the presidential election. Okay? And when people stay at home, they get left behind. That doesn't mean that you or I can't raise an issue or complain. If you look at the Constitution, it says everybody has the right to petition their government, meaning you can ask questions, regardless if you vote or don't vote. And when you hear, and I prefer to say elected people versus officials, because some elected people are not official.
No, right.
Okay. When you have elected people saying that, well, the voters don't know what they want. That's not good. Especially, if I voted for Mickey over here, and Mickey makes that statement, so Mickey should resign. So, because he or she just said, I don't know what I want, but I voted for you, so you need to go. I think, especially in Cleveland now, we're more so a black-brown town. And if you look across the landscape, a lot of communities or neighborhoods are being left behind. And I'll let you respond in a second here. When I hear council representatives stand up and say, well, the folks on the west side get this, the folks on the west side get that, they're actually telling on themselves, because east and west are geographical points on a map. Okay? And we'll just use Ward 3, which is primarily, let's just say, downtown. I consider that the neutral zone. When you have a councilman or woman stand up and say west side gets this, that means they're not opening their mouths. That's why certain communities on the east side are degraded, because nobody technically represents them. And you listen to the Body Talk radio program on the No Static Radio Network, and we have Tawayne McGee, Mr. Human Activist, here with us. And so if you can give us, the listeners, your thoughts on why people don't vote, aren't coming out to vote.
Well, based on my experience when I first got in, there were candidates that really gained my vote. But when the candidate that you back does not win, and it's repeated results for different candidates over time, some voters tend to just give up.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because as I was canvassing and walking the streets, I ran into a young lady, and she said, I'm never going to vote again. She had to be about 20, no older than 27. And I said, well, why aren't you ever going to vote again? She said, the candidate she supported didn't win in whatever election it was. And she had on a Browns jersey, Cleveland Browns jersey. And I said, so you're a football fan? She said, yeah. I said, I'm a big Browns fan. I said, well, did the Browns go to the Super Bowl? And she said, no. I said, but you're going to continue to cheer for them. And she said, I never thought of it that way. Okay. In an election, somebody does win and somebody does lose. And actually, when I say this, I'm not trying to change verbiage on anybody. There's actually two winners in an election. Both candidates are winners. Sometimes the ultimate winner is not the best candidate. He or she might not be the best candidate. Because I'm going to go back to borrow a word, and I firmly believe in what you said. a lot of elected people don't listen.
Mm.
And I'm going to paraphrase a statement that my grandmother used to make. He or she ain't doing nothing but collecting a check. Okay? So we have Tawayne McGee, human rights activist, uh, on the Body Talk Radio program on No Static Radio Network. So let me, and you say you go all over the state, because when I notice you on Facebook, I see you with this famous person in Akron, this famous person in Cincinnati. First off, I want to know who your travel agent is. Wow, like that, like crazy. But so let's somewhat focus on the state, okay, in the general sense.
Mm.
What do you consider the top human rights issues?
Well, once again, from listening to the people, there are issues that listening. Once again, the key word, listening.
Yeah, that they're saying that the people are saying.
To the people, asking them what matters to them, the issues that are not being addressed. Voter reform, human trafficking, which is a big one, takes place in small towns or big cities. So for those who are listening to this, human trafficking is a very big issue. No matter if it's a small town or big city, don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And definitely, when it comes to guns, Ohio is an open carry state.
Correct.
But I do remember during the Obama administration, he did say you have to register for the gun. Although with Ohio being an open carry state, I spoke with Governor Tawayne when he was running for re-election, and even on times when I mysteriously bumped into him at a couple of functions, and I told him directly, but in a matter of a way, I said, listen, me as a citizen, okay, I do believe that we do have the right to bear arms, because there's many things that's happening in this world that we need to defend ourselves. And of course, with a gun, yeah, sure, some people use knives, some people use swords. Of this, of course, you got the whole, ninja thing going with you. But with the gun, I mean, bullets don't have eyes. Right. But the person who pulls the trigger does. So I do believe that when it comes to gun legislation, certain legislation does need to be passed. Like, for one, you should do a background check on the person to see what type of medical history they have, to see what type of, insanity they have had. Because not every person that has a gun should not carry that gun.
Well, let's focus on the gun issue for a minute. And you mentioned somebody with some psychological or mental deficiency. So when Susie or Jeff, it could be man or woman, goes into a legal gun store and fills out that 2-page application, that application is then taken and scanned directly into the FBI. And the FBI, the data bank will come back and say, well, no, Susie and Al, or whoever, both had 16 federal convictions of this, and whatever, so they're not eligible to purchase a gun. When you talk about somebody's health status, now we're talking about invading that person's HIPAA rights. Okay, an individual's health status is their own. So I'll use my name. Well, no, I'm not. Bob might be able. He won't be able to get a gun, but he can go to the DMV and get a driver's license. So Bob or Betty could run over 15 people within 6 minutes. Okay? I'm not saying you're wrong, but how do you keep somebody's privacy? So if a person fills out that application, even for a driver's license, the right to purchase a gun, or even go to Giant Eagle, how would you like to scan a check? And a person, the cashier, puts that check in that register and says, a red light pops up, mental deficiency, so they won't let you buy bananas or whatever it is that day. That's a far-fetched example, of course. We have to be very careful here. When we talk about, and everybody gets the Second Amendment, they stretch it, the right to bear arms, that was because the nation would say the British should come to British should come to farmers to pick up their weapons or whatever and go fight in the army, or fight the British. There are issues with guns, but if I can't buy a gun at whatever gun store, I can buy a gun on the street.
True.
So we have a conundrum here. Now, there's certain individuals, and I won't mention their name, well, why should somebody have the ability to buy a military-style assault weapon like the AR-15? Yes, that is a military weapon. And to be candid with you, you can put any gun on this table, that gun will never go off as long as nobody picks it up and pulls the trigger. And you mentioned, yeah, it's dangerous, quote unquote, out here. And I have the right, you have the right to defend yourself. Laws such as stand your ground now exist in Ohio. I first encountered stand your ground in Florida. The question that I have, and let's not make this into a Democrat versus Republican or conservative versus a liberal discussion. How do we make that determination on what or who, what type of gun can be purchased, and who can purchase a gun, and what type of gun can be purchased? I'm sorry.
And well, me as a citizen and a person who hasn't been on the federal level yet, but have connected with federal elected officials, I've said to Senator Sherry Brown, I've said to, I have not reached out with this topic with newly elected Senator J.D. Vance yet, and also Governor DeWine, that it needs to be a process to determine who is capable of using a weapon, who is capable of using the gun.
Well, it's and again, I understand where you're coming from. We listen to the Body Talk radio program on the No Static Radio Network, and we have Tawayne McGee, who is a human rights activist, and you touch on and you speak with very, I don't want to call them significant people, and everybody has high regard and respect for you. I don't want to say I'm following you around because that makes me a stalker. I run into people you've spoken to, and they say, well, do you know McGee? I said, well, from afar, but again, we met at a couple functions. And they have high regard for you, and they actually do listen to what you say, because some of them will repeat back, say, well, he talked about this, what's your impression on that? And I'll say, well, I agree with him here. I would agree with him on this one if he would just twist it a little, or turn it a little, or whatever. But guns, the gun issue is important, and as you noted, and guns lead to violence. The question is, and again, you and I'm not a psychiatrist by any means, why are people so angry? To, when you and I were growing up, and I'm much younger than you, when you and I were growing up, we would maybe get into a fist fight or a wrestling match, and it would be over. Now, young men and women, they pull out a gun. And you're more of a recent graduate than I am. You have 13, 14, 15-year-old kids out here with guns. And I hope nobody ever points a gun at you or whatever, in any means. But when somebody points a gun at you, that person is no longer a kid.
That person is a threat.
He's a threat. And I don't care if you're 13 or 23 or 33 or 53. We have to find out why kids or people are angry. That's what we have to figure out. You're listening to Tawayne McGee on the on the Body Talk Radio Network. And just to move along, you across the state, so guns is one of the issues. You said human trafficking.
Yes.
And I agree with you. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I have couple true friends who go to the human trafficking conference every year that's held here in Cleveland. FBI, the state, and everybody shows up for this conference. And one of the things that is surprising, and we're not trying to put people on report here, there's 1,100 kids or people missing in Cleveland. And I don't like to use the term runaway. Let's just drill down and say it's kids, but it's some adults too. All those children are not runaways. You can't call them a runaway until they come. You find, and they come back and say, I ran away from home because they only gave me one Applebee's, whatever. Okay. A lot of kids might be trafficked. You don't know. Okay. And I think that's something that needs to be put up on the radar. And when you talk to an elected person, and he or she says, "Well, it's not important."
When he or she says that it's not important, and I have to speak freely about this. This is a very important issue. Human trafficking is very important. Just maybe a month or two ago, there was a human trafficking scandal happening in North Olmsted.
Right.
That just happened. Former elected elected officials who were on like school boards and everything, to people who were school psychiatrists within North Olmsted School District, or for the schools, were a part of this.
Right.
And hearing about it, it kind of it just made me so furious. Because although I don't have any family that live in North Olmsted, maybe a small amount of friends, but even if it happened in Cleveland, that right there has a big impact on, like, being a parent. You say, okay, with this happening, I don't feel that my kid is safe going to school these days. And with that said, maybe I should homeschool them or something like that. Now, I'm not a parent, but I do have nieces and nephews in which I do care for. And I say to them, and I say to their mothers who are my sisters, is what I said to. I said, listen, try to find possibly, maybe if you don't feel like the public schools, maybe Catholic charter schools, because they happen to be real popular nowadays. Catholic and charter schools, because they seem to be a safe educational system and place that your kids can be safe in.
And you raise a good point. And again, I'm not going to slam or diminish CMSD. So if we take this child and put he or she in a Catholic school, let's just say the academics are better. And let's just say that it might be a little bit safer for that 5 or 6 hour day. North Olmsted was a great example because this was actually happening in the school system. One of the issues, especially with human trafficking, is when that kid walks out that door on his or her way back home, or it could happen in school. One of the things that has really increased the issue of human trafficking is that thing called the smartphone. These kids and the traffickers actually hunt for children through social media. Okay. You mentioned North Olmsted. There was a case, let's say about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, where they caught 18, predominantly they were all black men. I think 2 or 3 of them were white. They were doing human trafficking in Cleveland. Okay. So one of the things, and I'll raise the issue if you might not be on your radar, where now certain states want to pass laws for this child under a certain age, he or she can't have a Facebook account, an Instagram account, or whatever account is out there, TikTok. I'm too old for all that stuff. But so would that protect the kids?
Once again, in my position, I feel that putting uh, putting a certain blockage when it comes to kids having social media, I think that would help a little bit, because once again, I have nieces and nephews who are like 15 to 16. They get into that age where they can learn how to be social with other people. And sometimes technology and social media helps them with that. Now, if you're like 10 years old, no, you should not have a social media account because, there's some there's some child molesters out there, some stalkers, a whole lot of that.
And again, I agree with you. You're listening to the Body Talk Radio program on No Static Radio Network. And we have Tawayne McGee with us, who's a native Clevelander, and he is an activist in human rights. What's interesting, especially when you look at 2023 and going forward, yes, there was no such thing as a smartphone when I was growing up. The closest thing you had a smartphone, you had a long cord. On the kitchen phone, you could walk around the house, or the first cordless phone actually was invented back then. But one of the things that's interesting here, and again, Tawayne, I do agree with you, that if you put blockages up, and 9, 10-year-old should not have access to certain things. That's a parental issue. All right. Now you're talking about what are my rights as a citizen and a human being. If we look at today, and we can say Florida, Illinois, Colorado, you have governors saying, no, you can't have these books in the library. No, you can't talk about this in class. Anytime you have individuals, and it's a little bit beyond the smartphone issue, anytime you have somebody saying, no, you can't read this, you can't watch this, you can't do that, they're controlling the information that you have access to that can determine what you might need or want to know. Yeah. And it's a personal thing. I don't want anybody ever to tell me what I can watch, what I can read, and what I can eat, unless you're a physician. Because what you're trying to do, you're dumbing me down to a level to where I won't be able to listen, learn, discern, and then decide on what is good for my life. Now, there's laws and the parameters. In cities, you have these things called ordinances. At the state level, you have laws, and federal, you have laws. But from a personal perspective, I should be able to go in any library and grab the Bible. Just recently, if I remember 2 or 3 days ago, in the Florida legislative body, they're talking about banning the Bible in schools. Now, again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm a religious thumper, but maybe I need the Bible just to look up who were the disciples. Okay. Let's back up. I agree with you that some 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old doesn't need access to TikTok and all the other social media platforms. And at whatever given age that parent deems that I have a mature enough child to do things or have access to things is fine. And you're listening to the Body Talk Radio program on No Static Radio Network. We have Tawayne McGee, who born and raised here in Cleveland, and he is a human rights activist. So you mentioned gun access or weapon access, human trafficking. What's the other couple issues, or 3 or 4?
Well, definitely voter reform, but also adding, and this is what a parent told me, child endangerment.
Okay.
Yeah, child endangerment. If you want to, put that in with human trafficking and everything too, but definitely, I think children are a main target really nowadays. I mean, like, of course, adults can be targets too, but I think children are a very easier target for people.
Okay. Yeah. Well, voter reform. What's voter reform?
So to me, voter restrictions as well as that too. Who's able to vote based on certain characteristics, certain abilities, certain things based on it. listen to certain elected officials and even fellow activists, they feel that, or even just add a certain ethnicity of people. They feel like the voting process is not fair on behalf of them. Now, we're looking back in the 1960s, where, of course, certain ethnicities didn't have the fair expression to vote as well as that too, and they feel that history is trying to repeat itself.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because history does repeat itself. It just comes back maybe in a different flavor. It can come back weaker, it can come back stronger. And you mentioned the '60s, and well, I was born in the '50s, but that's okay. See, one of the things that we grew up with was, and I didn't grow up in the South. I grew up on the southeast side of Cleveland, the South. But one of the things that's unique about voting, especially for Black Americans or African Americans, whatever term you prefer. See, there was a time in the South you couldn't vote. There would be a bar of soap, and they would say, "How many bubbles can you get out of a bar of soap?" And you could say 100, you could say 1,000. The answer was never correct, so you weren't permitted to vote. Or there might be a jar of marbles or jelly beans. How many beans or marbles in the jar? You could say 1,000 or whatever. And they say, no, you're wrong, you can't vote. The other thing that they use, if you weren't able to write your name, you couldn't vote. Now, the Voting Rights Act came about. President Johnson brought that forward in the 60s. So it's all coming back again. The bar soap thing doesn't exist. The jelly bean jar doesn't. Some people will say that it's due to the gerrymandering of districts. But again, that goes back to 5-10 minutes ago, where local elections are important. If we don't vote, then whatever party wins in every 10 years, which is based upon when the census is taken, that's when gerrymandering pops up. Now, gerrymandering has become a dirty word today. Okay? And not everybody, but a lot of people will recall what happened last year when the gerrymandering issue popped up in the Ohio Supreme Court. And the Chief Justice, who happened to be a Republican, she also served as Lieutenant Governor in one administration. She fought against her own party. And they tried to disassociate themselves from her for that because she saw what was going on. See, one of the things, again, just rhetorical, it's a question to you. If the Democrats would have won, would they have done the same thing? If they control the primary offices, and I'm not just talking about the state rep and Senate seats, the appropriation board, which is made up of the senior level folks, and it has a couple state senators and reps on it. I think the Democrats would have gerrymandered too. You're gonna do what's right for you.
And here's the thing. I remember how you just said the judge that went against their party.
Right.
See, I'm currently an independent. I used to be a Democrat, but I'm an independent due to the position that I've created for myself, and meeting with Democrats and Republicans, taking notes and learning from them. If I was in a certain party, like if I was a Democrat or a Republican, and an elected official at that time, and I needed a source or a resource to help me serve my people, and I couldn't find it in my own party, I will go across to the other side and find that source or resource that I need and work with them to serve the people that I was elected to serve.
See, that's interesting. You said you would go across the aisle, and I respect the fact that you're independent or you're an independent.
I'm an
Make that perfectly clear. See, one of the things is just a personal thing, and I mean this not in a cynical, sarcastic way. I really don't care if a person is a Democrat, Republican, independent, communist, socialist, or whatever. To me, the most important thing is that person go vote. Because if you are a strict whatever party you affiliate with, that means whatever those planks in that party document say, that's where you're going to reside and that's where you're going to think. being an independent, you can go across both aisles or all four aisles,
Yeah,
whatever it is,
anyway, basically.
any way. And see, I think the collegiality in politicians, the elected people, has dissipated. It's gone because they're so strict and narrow. That's all they focus on. Well, the Democratic or the Republican plank or the independent plank or whatever says this. And this is what I'm going to live and die on, period. And that's really not of a good benefit to the citizens that that individual represents. I don't care if you're the mayor or council or whatever. See, one of the things, and I'm going to go back maybe 20, 25 minutes ago. See, you used the most critical word, listen. If you listen to the people who are in office, and I'm just keep it at the local level, you hear them say, well, my money. It's not your money. You know, well, my money or my people. I'm not one of your peoples.
You work for me.
Thank you. When a person is elected, even if you didn't vote for that individual, that person is an employee, more so a servant to you. And I'm going to be broad-based here. Most elected people don't know what it means to serve. They really don't. They're self-serving. They're not mass or citizen-serving at all. And you're listening to the Body Talk Radio program on the No Static Radio Network with Tawayne McGee. And I'm going to mention one item here that we'll go on about the other couple items you mentioned from a human standpoint. See, there's a community in Cleveland who's fighting to have a park, intergenerational park, put up where school used to exist. The school was once called Gracemont Elementary School, in Glendale. And the elected individual wants homes built there. But that's not what the citizens want. He or she, more so he, is not listening. He's hard-headed. I don't want to say anything else beyond that because I'm getting on the road here. Give the people what they want. You know, you can't build $250,000 homes, and across the street you have homes valued at $85,000 to $110,000. Plus the area where these homes are supposed to be built on Gracemont, former lot. Close to Lee Road, you have a beautician supply company. You have a funeral home, and I'm not knocking the businesses. Across the street, still on Lee Road, you have a fast food sandwich shop. And I have immense respect for you. It is no way that I would buy a $250,000 home in a cluster of what I just described. It just doesn't make sense. You're listening to the Body Talk Radio program on No Static Radio Network. If you have any questions or comments, you can call area code 216-939-5087, or you can email them to bodytalkradioprogram@gmail.com. So you mentioned we covered gun rights or gun purchases, human trafficking, and voter reform. I think I know you do much more than that, and we'll get to a couple of them after we have a break here. I think one of the most important ones is voter reform. I don't really see any particular party trying to restrict voting. They might try to make it difficult. Okay. If I go vote tomorrow and they say, well, you need your utility bill. If I want to vote, I'll go home and get my utility bill. Okay. As long as that is across the board, I'm talking about for black, white, or any other culture. I bring my utility bill back, and they say, well, now you need your driver's license. I walked. I got to go back. I'll go back home and get my driver's license. See, I think another thing that people miss here, or misunderstand, they say, well, we have to stand in line for a long time. The state doesn't determine how many voter machines go in the precinct, voting precinct. That's done at the local level.
Mm.
So if precinct 0
Mm.
has a low voter turnout over the last 3 elections, and they always had 30 voting machines, the election board is not going to put 30 machines back in there. They're going to, let's say cut them in half by 15 or maybe reduce it to 10. So of course the lines are going to be longer. But we did that to ourselves. And it's just not black folks, it's a combination of all cultures. You're listening to the Body Talk radio program, and what we're about to do, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and we're going to come back. But before the break, I have an announcement to make. The JFK Eagles All-Class Picnic is scheduled for September 2nd, 2023 at Caruthers Park. The address is 17218 Tarkington Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio. If you need the zip to put in your GPS, that's 44128. Mark the date is September the 2nd. The all-class Kennedy picnic is going to be held. We'll be back in approximately 360 seconds with Mr. McGee and pick up the conversation from there. Thank you for listening. We'll be right back. This committee has to sit down.
Has violence happened to you or your family? Violence can affect all parts of your life, sometimes in ways you can't see. Violence can affect the way you eat, sleep, and cause you to lose focus for anger, afraid, or even use drugs or drinking as a way to escape. But we're here to tell you that violence doesn't have to keep hurting, and you can change your life starting now with help from the Trauma Recovery Center. We want you to take control of your life. Today can be the day. The Trauma Recovery Center offers real help for real needs in real time. They offer services for food, clothes, safety, emotional support, and a whole lot more. So do not let violence control you. You can break free, and TRC can help. Give them a call at 216-644-5487. They will come to you wherever you are. They're free. They are 24/7 and confidential. They can give you the tools to rebuild your life and your health. They offer real help for real needs in real time. Again, they can give you the tools to rebuild your life and your health. Call today. They're free. They're 24/7 and they're confidential. So look, if you want out and don't know where to start, call the Trauma Recovery Center. The Trauma Recovery Center will help you take back your life after finally starting today. Call today and get the help you need today. If you're listening, if you're watching, the numbers on the screen: 216-644-5487. The Trauma Recovery Center of Northeast Ohio, also affiliated with the Center for Families and Children. All right. I think that this is one of my, well, outside of the shows in themselves, it's one of my favorite segments here at No Static Radio. And here at No Static Radio, we don't confine ourselves to just 28 days out the year. We celebrate the history of those that are awesome, and we can let the music go for a minute. It's doing its own thing. But we like to celebrate our historians and what they do here. So we call this Our History 365. And on today's Our History 365, I want to introduce to some and reintroduce to others Leonard C. Bailey. So born September 1st. Well, he was born in 1825. They don't know what month, what day, but unfortunately he left this earth September 1st, 1918. He was an Afro-American inventor, entrepreneur, and banker. Yeah, so this is a little different. Yeah, he founded one of the first Afro-American banks in the United States. Bailey was born in 1825 to a free black family. Growing up in poverty, Bailey worked as a barber and built up a chain of barbershops in Washington, D.C. Bailey invented and received patents for a series of devices, many designed for military and government use. These included a collapsible folding bed designed for easy storage and portability, an innovation adopted by the U.S. military, a rapid mailing stamping machine used by the U.S. Postal Service, a device to stunt trains to different tracks, and a hernia truss adopted into wide use by the U.S. Army Medical Board. Bailey had escaped from the military camp. After there, he was captured They captured him, and they attempted to capture him anyway, as a slave while he was dropping off his inventions. The inventions provided him with a sizable income. Bailey helped establish the Capital Savings Bank of Washington, D.C., one of the first Afro Americans owned banks, in the U.S. During the Panic of 1893, the bank was maintained and its solvency was obtained by a personal loan from the National Bank. Bailey was a member of the first mixed race jury in Washington, D.C., which found Millie Gaines not guilty of murder by reason of insanity. I guess you guys would have to look more into that. He served as a member of the board of directors of Manses Industrial School for Colored Youth, where a residence hall was named after him. Bailey died September 1st, 1918, of sudden illness, and was buried in what is now known as National Harmony Memorial Park in Largo, Maryland. So listen, you guys know what I say every single week. If you don't want to go to a library, you can't make it to a library, things happen in life. You know what I say all the time. Google, Google. Google your history. Knowing your history is knowing your now. And now back to Ayl Bridges with Body Talk.
Thank you, Marie, for that brief Black History moment. My name is Ayl Bridges. I'm host of Body Talk radio program on No Static Radio Network. And today we have in the studio, besides our guest, Mr. McGee, we have three outstanding young ladies who are in the program from the Youth Opportunity Unlimited, better known as IOU or Youth. We have Jessica, Regine, and Anastasia. One of them I call Miss New York. The other one is, and I'll say her for last, is Regine, and Anastasia, who is Miss John Carroll. And it's taking nothing away from the other two ladies. I want everybody to understand something. These are three outstanding young women, and Anastasia, she's on her way to John Carroll University, a Jesuit college here in Cleveland, private school, on a full scholarship. Not a football scholarship, not a volleyball scholarship. I don't think she plays golf. She's going strictly academics. So they're going to be in the studio. They're going to be with us through August.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not going to be a surprise to anybody but them. Next week, one of them is actually going to co-host with me, and they're going to be interviewed. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be Regine or Anastasia. Excuse me, it's Anastasia. So she's going to be sitting where Mr. McGee is. And one of the things, I'm going to save the guest's name because it is an outstanding woman who's going to be on the program with us. And she is just a jewel in the city of Cleveland. So stay tuned. Just look on the Facebook page of the station and you will see her name pop up Wednesday. If you're of a certain age and generation, I would suggest you eat your Rice Krispies early and pay attention because this lady impacted several of our lives on the east side of Cleveland. So before we go back to Twan, one of the two mantras that I have for this program, and it's a personal thing also, is prostate cancer in minority men. I'm encouraging all black men, especially if you're over 25 to 32, but definitely if you're in your 30s, to go get tested, get a PSA exam. That's nothing but a blood draw, and they can determine if you have any type of cancer cells in your prostate. It is a silent killer for black men. The other one is violence against women. And let me make something very clear. It matters not if you work at Amazon, sell Avon, or if you are a stay-at-home mom. It matters not if you're an attorney, magistrate, judge, doctor, nurse, STNA, student, or whatever your profession. If you need assistance, if you need an escape plan from an abusive environment, call the police, call the trauma center, call the YWCA. If you're a true friend, I mean a true friend of someone that is being abused, be a better friend. Do not return that person into that situation. I'm going to paraphrase a book title of Bishop T.D. Jakes, Loose and Free That Woman.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to Mr. McGee here. Twan, you're all over the state, man. That's a compliment. I don't mean that to be negative or derogatory. And you've met with the governor, or talked with the governor, met with the governor, Senator Brown. You have, as you mentioned earlier, you're trying to get through to Senator Vance. And one of the things I do truly respect out of you, you'll talk to any and everybody.
Mm.
But more so, I'm going to go back to that 6-letter word you use, you'll listen to anybody. Okay? And you make up your own mind. And like, as I have shared with the audience over time, the best interviews actually take place prior to the show or during the break. Okay? And one of the things that you mentioned earlier, and I guess, you and I talked briefly about the young ladies from the YOU program that are here. And I applaud them because they're learning something, but they're giving up their summer. And if you could really see Miss New York, she smiles all the time. So I can't wait to get her on the air to learn some things about her and share her with the audience here. Let's talk about Cleveland, and more so from an activist standpoint. And we talked about certain things, the gun violence or access to guns and some other things. And one statement you made earlier was the issue of college affordability. How do we make college affordable?
Wow. Well, I wish I was a U.S. Senator or a congressperson, maybe even a president to give you a proper answer for that. But coming from the local standpoint, and even as a former student of a community college, of course, you have to apply for scholarships. You do your FAFSA. There's a lot you have to do to prepare yourself from that high school to that college transition. And of course, financial aid is one of those ones to go through to make college affordable. There was a former elected official that they're no longer in there anymore, but they brought up this idea about possibly when it comes to certain neighborhoods, looking at somebody's living status and says, okay, this person who is currently using government assistance, they, of course, if they're not in a position to work a traditional 9 to 5 because due to maybe a certain disability or something like that, but they want to go to school, maybe we should try to come up with a certain program that allows that, because they want to go to school, they want to, but they're just not in a position to go. But yet you have people who can go to school, but they don't want to go to school.
Well, we talk about when we talk about affordability, and what's important here, there's two terms, rich and poor, and that's relative to who you're in the room with. If both you and I, and it looks like you got about $3,000 in your pocket, so, but don't rob him when we leave the studio. When you walk, if both you and I were to walk into a daycare center, let's just say the oldest child there is 4. Even if we had $10 in our pocket, we're rich then. But while we're standing there, if Warren Buffett walks into that same room, everybody's poor. When we talk about affordability, and if we were going to stratify using, we use zip codes or whatever, to say, well, if you live in zip code 44 whatever, let's just say it's 100. Everybody there, quote unquote, is at the poverty level. I'm not saying is at the poverty level. So if those children and or adults want to go to college, should the government just say, open up the door and let everybody in? Make the world perfect, everybody graduates and does well, right? If you look at the state of Ohio, college education has exponentially risen over the years. If you go back to the 70s, you could attend one of the state universities on the median for about $6,000 to $8,000 a year. Those same universities, because they now have Starbucks and a rock climbing wall, and you now have a diner car where you can eat in the cafeteria, wherever. That same school, that same accounting course, the same history course, now costs you $18,000 to $22,000 a year. So and again, if you look at the cost, the administrative cost of the school, you have college presidents making in the millions. You have deans at colleges, more so in state colleges, making over $500,000, somewhere at $1 million a year. And that's separate from, I'm not picking on Ohio State, the Ohio State, excuse me.
Ohio State.
Not picking on the Ohio State. They have a medical hospital affiliated with them. So we're going to set aside the physician salaries there. Some of these college administrators are making a ton of money. Yeah. And if we, meaning the voters, could control that and keep in mind it's the governor who appoints boards to all these universities. Where's the common man or woman that sits on the board and says, hey, I have 3 wonderful young ladies who I would like to attend college, and they are all great students, but it comes down to an affordability issue. And see, one of the things that, and again, I'll let you answer in a minute here. See, one of the things, especially for marginalized people, I mean Black and other minorities, if you increase the cost, that diminishes that group's opportunities to attend college. And I think that until we, the people, again, going back to the Constitution, you have the right to petition your government, meaning you can speak up and ask questions, which a lot of us don't do anymore. We can control the cost of education. You know, I don't want to tell you when I was in school that I walked up the hill to go there and up the hill to come back. But I remember we screamed when books started costing $35 and $40 a pop. And you couldn't sell them back in the bookstore. Now most books are electronic. Most colleges use electronic books. And from my understanding, some of those books are in the hundreds of dollars. I think once, and whatever your concept, the next time you run into government line, please feel free to give them my number. We have to do something to decrease the cost for everybody, okay, and more so we can stratify it based upon income. You're listening to the Body Talk Radio program on No Static Radio Network. So let's come back home for a minute. You mentioned that you have siblings.
Yeah.
How many siblings do you have?
Well, blood and even non-blood, a whole lot.
A whole lot, okay. Are they all still locally in Cleveland?
Some, yeah, and some are. Some who grew up with the snow and don't like the snow, they decided to move to states that no longer have snow.
Oh, well, you find a state where it doesn't snow now. It snows in Arizona. And it definitely snows in Northern California. See, one of the things that in my travels in and around Greater Cleveland and the state, and I mentioned this to you during the break, and people will walk up to me, and I guess they do it because both you and I are Black. We're so Black men. And one of the first was, do you know Tawayne McGee? And I said, well, I know of him. I've spoken with him, blah, 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 et cetera, excuse me. And they'll say, well, what do you think about this? You know, this is what he said. And I said, well, I think that's a good idea, or I add to it. I said, well, you know, let me add this to it, or let me take this away from it. And just everybody I've spoken to about you respects you. And I think, I'm not going to mention the individual's name that I spoke with, but one of the individuals, he left an impression on me, and I'm going to share it with you about you. He said, the one thing I respect about Tawayne is that he asked the question, and he let me answer it. He listened to what I had to say. and this was an elected person, okay, high level elected person, and he wished the best for you. Now, one of the things that's surprising, you don't have to, I'm sure you have many opportunities before you or had them. He said, I really wanted to offer him a position, but he sort of told me no, and which is good for you. See, one of the things that I think other people respect about you and what I have high regard for you is that you can't be bought. You're your own person. And maybe that comes from you adopting to become an independent, but more so how, you were socialized, raised. And I think that whoever impounded that and left that impression on you, you always keep that. Don't lose that. Don't lose that. Let's go back here. Politics in the general context. You mentioned some qualities when you compared now Judge Kelly to Mayor Bibb, young versus somebody who's established or whatever, a long-term elected person, and now Judge Kelly. What do you think the voters are looking for?
I could probably speak on this because I am a voter.
Well, I hope so.
I could be one of these guys that say, I ain't voting for nobody. But somebody that, okay, there's a couple of things. Somebody that I can relate to, really, somebody that I can relate to. I've known Kevin Kelly for years. It's always been neutral, behind and by. A couple of times we had a couple of conversations as well as that too. I really didn't know much about his personal background until he ran for mayor. Then he shared a lot more. And then, of course, Mayor Bibb. I've known him before he was mayor. I've seen him around at functions. And always carried himself well. And even with just not because we're both African American, we're both from Cleveland, but we have a lot of more similarities than I do with Kevin Kelly.
Okay, besides the cultural issue, are you talking about age-wise?
I mean, yeah, we're both young. I'm in my late 20s. He's in his mid 30s. So there's a not too far of an age gap.
All right.
And he grew up in Mount Pleasant. Dove, and I grew up in the Glenville Collinwood neighborhood. So we both know what it's like to grow up in urban neighborhoods.
Well, and which is, that's good that both of you have that affinity. I don't want to use the term synergy because one area is that way and the other one is this way. There's some mileage difference.
Mm-hmm.
See, one of the things that, without being specific, not specific, but when you talk about yourself in comparison to the mayor, both of you happen to be black men, both of you happen to be young. And was that the draw for voters? And you said you're a voter, which I know you are. Was that the draw? Because, well, when you see him, you saw yourself. Age-wise, we'll separate the color for just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
If you look, let's go back 16 years, you had Mayor Jackson for 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
Black guy, grew up in the central neighborhood, did the Army thing, got out the Army, went to law school, council president, then mayor, and so forth and so on. Everybody's different. And it's just not the age. I think the affinity, the draw that might draw voters is not necessarily, I want to see somebody my age. I want to see somebody who has that character and integrity and who can represent not only him or herself, but when they stand up there and speak, I want them to be a symbol for me, for the whole city. And I'm not trying to make fun of anybody who stands up and says dumb and numb and knows the proper use of English and understands the vocabulary of their position. You know, I've heard council members talk about, well, the zone I represent, we don't live in zones, we live in wards. Okay. Again, what I had mentioned earlier, they use the term or use the statement, my money. It's not your money. Or they walk away when you ask them a question. You shouldn't do that. Or they come out and say, well, you can pull the ordinances for yourself. I spent $500,000, which is $500,000, and grass cutting for seniors. That's a lot of money to spend. And I'm not knocking cutting, grass cutting programs for seniors. $500 is a lot for seniors, okay? And they decline to show you the documents. Show me the list of addresses and the names, or how people even signed up to get their lawns cut for $500,000. That's a lot. Okay. You're listening to the Body Talk radio program on No Static Radio Network. Before we wrap up, and I want you to think about this as I do prepare this read, I want you to think about, and it could be somebody who's alive, it doesn't have to be somebody who's super famous, whatever. Who would be your Black history figure, the person you strictly admire? And I want you to think about it. Don't give the audience the answer there. We're gonna play Jeopardy. Okay? We're not gonna play Jeopardy. Let me give you a Black history moment. And first off, I want to wish every man out here a post-Happy Father's Day. If you have children and you were fortunate enough to celebrate Father's Day with them, I applaud you. Or if your dad is no longer alive, he still lives because of the way that you carry yourself. My Black history moment today is a gentleman by the name of Mr. Robert Smalls. Mr. Smalls commandeered the Confederate ship, the Planter, in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, on May 13th, 1862. The thing that was great about Mr. Smalls, he was a slave. He was a slave. And he worked in the harbor. And he paid close attention to when the crew would leave the ship, how the captain, his gait, meaning his walk, and how he dressed. And he noticed that the crew would always leave the ship the same time every evening, which they weren't supposed to do, but the whole ship would be empty. And the captain would leave his hat. So he planned to steal the ship. Commandeer is a nice term for steal. And he did. He took his family and 13 other slaves and put them in the bows of the ship, put the captain's hat on, and sailed the ship out the harbor. He also paid attention to what the passwords were, because they had him working on the ship sometime. So when he got to a point where somebody said the password, he would holler out the password, and it kept going. Commandeered the ship, and he took the ship into the Beaufort Hilton Head Island area, where it became a Union vessel. The Navy captain of that area was so impressed, he gave the ship to Mr. Smalls and made him the captain of the ship. Because of that alone, President Lincoln was convinced to admit African Americans or Negroes into the Union Army and Navy, just based on what Mr. Smalls did. After the war ended, Mr. Smalls became a member of the House of Representatives from the state of South Carolina. He's one of the first Black members elected to Congress. So who would be your favorite, historical figure?
Oh, wow. Whew. You just named one.
You can name two.
Oh, name two.
It's my airtime. Go ahead.
Oh, wow. Within the ones that I have met over my life, you say you've seen me on social media, I must say. And some of these are non-politicians. I'm going to probably name two. One, he is a non-politician. He is Mr. LeVar Burton. Yeah, met him numerous times and spoken with him within those times that I had, and asking him some advice within life. You know, he was young within getting it to the entertainment in 19 playing Kunta Kinte and Roots. And I had asked him, what keeps you strong while continuing to live and work in the entertainment industry? And what advice could you give me? Even with not even pursuing entertainment, but just to keep on pursuing a career or keep living a life. He says, Mr. McGee, be relentless. And I take that with me everywhere I go. So Mr. LeVar Burton, he is a man that I was proud to meet and talk with within the life. And the second person that I have met would be, wow, man, it's something we go through all these names. Wow. Gotta bump it down. I'll probably say meeting one of the Kennedys, former Congressman Joe Kennedy III. Yeah. And I met him when he was in Ohio with current Congresswoman Marcy Kepler some years back. And just to meet, I know the Kennedy name goes way back in the history books, but even just to meet one, but it wasn't just the name alone, it was the meeting a person that I felt that I could learn a lot from within the political arena. His character, he has to be possibly in his mid-40s, probably say now, and he's been in Congress for so while. He's no longer in Congress.
Right.
But I remember asking him, what made you want to keep pursuing a public service career, besides from coming from a family of public service? He says that I want to make a difference. I want to make a difference and show people that not all politicians are crooked and up to no good. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, thank you. And before we sign off here, see, I'm never going to put anybody over him. That would be my dad, because one of the things that he taught me, and more so demanded, there were 5 R's that he wanted, along with my mom, besides reading, writing, and arithmetic, is to be respectful and responsible. And on top of that, the one thing, and somewhat what Joe Kennedy Jr. said, he said, don't you ever give up. He said, live and chase your dreams, because ultimately you'll catch one of them. And he said, don't ever let anybody diminish who and what you are. And he said, what's most important is that you believe in yourself. And with that, Tawayne, I'm going to say this to you. I thank you for being a guest on Body Talk. And I'm going to encourage you, if you don't have to do it, but I'm going to encourage you to do this. Consider running for office again. Not because, one, you have the energy, you have the youth, and more so, you have the character and integrity to do it. We have a lot of, and I'm not going to change your language, you keep saying political officials or elected officials, and I decline to do that. When you run, you're more than welcome to come back on the show as a guest. But more so, when you win, that's when I'll call you an elected official. I won't call you an elected person. As long as you maintain the character and integrity that you have today, which, and I've somewhat not followed you, but seen you do things, I doubt you lose that. And not only the coach would be proud of you, so would your parents, and I think the people you represent would be well served by you. You're listening to the Body Talk radio program on the No Static Radio Network. And next week, I have a co-host, Miss Anastasia, who's on her way to John Carroll University. I know she's tired of me saying that, but I'm giving her fair warning. So she'll be ready to go on the air. And in a way, all three of you will eventually go on air with me, okay? But one of the things that Anastasia happens to be first because she's the oldest. I think she's, what, 18 now? So she's 18. But I want her and all the other two will be here. And get your questions ready. Please have two questions, okay? Because the woman that's coming on this show next week will leave an impression on all three of you, if not everybody who will listen on the air or replay the show. I'm not going to tell you her name until she walks in the studio. You grab it off of the station Facebook live, post. This woman left an impression on everybody in the city of Cleveland, in my generation, and a little bit before. And when you hear this woman talk, if you're going to, and I mean it seriously, you're going to be spellbound about who and what she's done in the city of Cleveland. Again, thank you for listening. My name is Ayl Bridges. I'll hear and see you next week. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Probably go see some friends. Yeah, they shared about the thing. Tell us about the experience. Well, once again, Mr. Bridges, thanks for
Oh, thank you, man. It was my pleasure. And I'm serious. If you ever need to do something, send me something.
We'd like to thank you for tuning in to Body Talk with your host, Ayl Bridges, here on the station where we don't bring no static, but we sure enough bring the noise on staticradio.net. Make sure you guys check us out on social media. We absolutely love to hear from you on Facebook.com/No Static Radio LLC, on Twitter at No Static_Radio, on Instagram at TheReal_No Static Radio, on YouTube at No Static Radio, of course, all one word, in our newest platform, Discovered.tv. Not Discovery, that's the parent channel, Discovered.tv. Yeah, so also, if you guys would like to listen to replays of this show and others, please make sure you check us out on Mixler or Mixcloud.com. Just type in No Static Radio, all one word, in the toolbar for replays of this show and others. And for continuous streaming, that means no rebuffering, no refreshing pages. Sit back, relax. They'll do it on its own, even throw in a couple of commercials, and boom, you got us on TuneIn.com, live online radio.net, or MediaQ for continuous streaming of this show and all others on the platform. And for all things No Static Radio, including up and coming events, merchandise, and an in-depth look at all our great show hosts here, please check out our website at www.nostaticradio.net. Thank you guys for tuning in to Body Talk on this Testimony Tuesday. And you know what it is? We got my music for your listening pleasure. And later on this evening, we have the Reverend Doctor with today's gospel music show. And like I said, in the meantime, in the between time, we got my music for your listening pleasure here on Your Voices of Revolution. NoStaticRadio.net, powered by Google. Partner with Colors and sponsored by Lamont Avenue Wines, the Cleveland Rugby League, and Design Me exclusively. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you later. Peace.
Wake up. Y'all are too young to be asleep.